Welcome to Daily Saints with Grace. Fast, faithful stories told with clarity and heart. On November 21st, the church remembered a little girl who was carried up stone steps and given entirely to God. Scripture did not record the scene. Tradition did, and the memory shaped centuries of prayer. This was called the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a story about promise before responsibility and consecration before mission. Walk with me as we tell it in the quiet past tense where devotion usually speaks. They had waited long. That was how the story always began. Joachim and Anne had prayed through the embarrassment of barrenness, felt years gather like stones, and then, unexpectedly, life stirred. When the child arrived, gratitude ran ahead of them. They named her Mary and held her like a vow. Tradition said they promised her to God from the start, not to abandon their duty as parents, but to admit a truth they had learned the hard way. Gifts were received before they were managed. Their home sounded different after that. Every ordinary task, bread baked, wool spun, the little hands steady on a cup, felt like part of a larger dedication already in motion. And as the child grew, the promise waited for its steps. When the girl reached 3, the family climbed toward Jerusalem. That number came from ancient stories, not the Bible, but it held the shape of something real. Parents who kept a vow. They moved through streets that smelled of bread and dust and reached the temple where priests wore linen and the morning light pooled in the courts. It was said that the child climbed the steps without looking back. The detail could not be proven, but it captured the point. Consecration had been chosen before she could choose for herself, and soon it would become her own choice too. Joachim and Anne stood below with hands that both held and released. In that gesture, faith learned how to be a parent. The temple belonged to a rhythm. Smoke rising, psalms echoing, sandals whispering across stone. Mary entered that rhythm like a small candle guarded by 2 careful flames. Some accounts imagine she remained there to learn prayer, scripture, and the craft of listening. Historians debated how such residence worked for a child. Maybe it was brief. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe it was a rite more than a residence. The records kept their silence. But the tradition placed her in God's house so that later generations could grasp the theology behind her life. Before she became a living tabernacle, she stood in the shadow of the old one. And the light that fell through the lattice that day kept falling on the way she would live. The law spoke clearly about firstborn sons and their dedication. It said nothing binding about daughters. What Mary received, then, belonged to love before statute, to devotion before demand. Families had always invented rituals to thank God for safe births in a world where childbed was perilous and infancy fragile. A vow at the temple felt like honesty about how much could be lost and how precious survival was. The Proto-Evangelium of James told the story with detail scholars did not all trust. Yet the church kept the feast because the meaning rang true. The mother of the Lord had been given to the Lord first. That was the pattern of her life, gift before task. Every parent catechized, whether they admitted it or not. The only question was what they taught. Joachim and Anne taught that life returned to its maker with open hands. They did not erase their role. They deepened it. They would have still corrected, still sung, still told stories at night. But beneath the chores, a deeper sentence kept repeating, "You are God's before you are ours." Mary learned to live inside that sentence without fear. Dedication did not shrink the world. It widened it. And when her own annunciation arrived, her yes rose from ground already prepared. The temple was massive stone, cedar, bronze. A child was small, but God liked small beginnings. He had chosen lamps and loaves and tiny measures of oil to carry large meanings. Writers in the East loved to describe Mary as the Holy of Holies in person, the place where God would dwell without curtain or veil. If that sounded like poetry, it also sounded like doctrine wrapped for singing. The presence that once rested between cherubim would soon rest beneath her heart. The day of her presentation simply rehearsed the logic of Christmas in advance. People had always brought sacrifice, grain, wine, animals, promises. Consecrating a child did not cancel parental duty. It clarified it. Mothers and fathers still guarded the door, taught the prayers, and made the bread. Only now they did it as stewards, not owners. The world would keep arguing about the word indoctrination, as if neutrality were ever possible. But every household trained its love toward a future. In this house, the future bent toward God's will, not passively, but with courage that acted. And when Mary stood beneath a cross years later, the first offering had already taught her how to stand. The feast ended where it began, with parents, promises, and a child who belonged to God before she belonged to history. No document could prove every step. The church kept the day because holiness had left a reliable pattern behind it. We were asked to remember our own beginnings. Who offered us, who prayed over us, who taught us to say yes when it counted. If the story steadied you, comment "given to God," and name one person who first placed you on the path toward Him. Like the video so others find it. Subscribe to Daily Saints with Grace for fast, faithful stories, and share this with parents who are trying to raise courage in a noisy world. May Saints Joachim and Anne teach us how to give thanks for gifts we could never earn.